Welcome back to Italian Politician of the Week. I am Ipernick, the Great is Silent, and today we're talking about Massimo D'Alema, one of the founding fathers of the modern Italian left, former Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, CEO of iconic mustaches, and one of the most important opponents to Berlusconi's rise to power. In this Season 5 premiere, I will try to explain how D'Alema almost single-handedly converted an old communist party into something more concrete, how he abandoned the ideologies of the past and looked right ahead into the future. Did he make it? Let's find out. But first, roll the intro. D'Alema was born in 1949 in Rome. He came from a family of artisans, therefore he grew up in a very anti-fascist environment. His family never stayed in the same place for too long due to his father's occupation. However, D'Alema showed the promise from a very young age, being considered a prodigy at school. He signed up to the Communist Party when he was just 14 and remained politically active even during university years, which he spent in Pisa studying law. Now, D'Alema's university years also match with the student movements of 1968. Despite him being part of the Communist Party, he was strongly anti-Soviet and even took part in many of these protests. These events eventually led to an interesting change to party politics in Italy, and the personalities that rose to power in the 80s and later were fueled with a strong reformist sentiment, which not only looked outwards but also inwards, that means in their own parties. For example, the Secretary of Democrazia Cristiana, Ciriaco de Mita, the leader of the Socialists, Bertinotti, Marco Pannella from the Libertarian Party of the Radicali, and last but not least, Enrico Berlinguer from the Communist Party. Now, the sounds you just heard are different, because this sound means that I already made a video on this person and you will find the link below. But if you heard this sound, it means that I haven't done a video on them yet. But I plan to, so be sure to comment down below if you are interested in the person I just mentioned. Berlinguer himself actually saw the potential in Massimo D'Alema and therefore nominated him Secretary of the Italian Communist Youth Federation, a charge he held from 1975 until he was elected into parliament in 1987. By the time he got elected, however, the Communist Party was going through a decline. Berlinguer had died 3 years before, the Cold War was ending, and the leaders Natta and Occhetto were just not good enough. The hope for a change of pace had actually been growing for a while, especially among D'Alema's supporters, who were looking for a way to break the old status quo and to abandon the logos and mottos of a now decaying ideology. This came in 1989, a few days after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Achille Occhetto, or as I like to call him, the pressed Antonio Razzi, during a press conference admitted that the Italian Communist Party was thinking about rebranding. While the majority of the party members welcomed this change, a relative number of hardcore tankies opposed the idea of change and made a new party called Communist Refoundation. Its leader will be a certain Fausto Bertinotti, who will maintain a very significant position in the Italian political sphere until his retirement in 2008. The PDS, and the Democratic Party of the Left, paid for this change by losing about 10% of the votes at the 1992 elections, most of which went to Bertinotti's men. While I do think that the initial loss was predictable, what a lot of people did not expect was the clean hands judicial campaign, where a lot of politicians were put on trial over illegitimate funds, tax evasion and corruption by the magistrate Antonio Di Pietro. The entire political class was hit hard, especially on the right and center, while the left got out of it relatively unharmed. When looking back at this turn of events, some people have their own takes. People on the right call for a conspiracy against the current government, because everyone was taking bribes at the time, and the way only some parties had to pay the consequences was unfair. The general narration among the more pragmatic historians and journalists like Montanelli is that the left was also caught in the storm of accusations, but their crooks were just too loyal to the party to throw dirt at it. So instead of blaming their superiors like everyone else was doing, all the communists just took all the guilt and paid the consequences. This is mostly true, but the way Montanelli puts it, it just describes the communists as some sort of cult or whatever. D'Alema's take on the situation is that the campaign did little more than throwing baseless accusations of corruption, which in turn got overblown by the media and eventually escalated to mob justice. On the other hand, he did also say that if the left did not get harmed as much, it's because they were not as sturdy as the rest, which is debatable at best. I have to remind you that the Italian communists received billions in funds from the Soviet Union, and it is not certain how much because none of them were declared. Personally, I don't think that the right way to look at this historical event is by taking the side of your favorite party, rather on the strategy of Di Pietro himself, which seemed to focus more on taking down people rather than finding out if they were guilty or not. As I said before, such eagerness to bust the crook was fueled by the media too, the same media owned by Silvio Berlusconi, who will surf the wave of mistrust towards the institutions to run his own political campaign, which will take Italy by storm. Occhetto, between 1989 and 1994, was too busy being anti-establishment that he had failed to emphasize what was at the basis of their identity. The same set of values and dreams which did not apply to communism that had given people hope for over 50 years. And it is for that reason that Berlusconi won, because Occhetto either looked too old or too lost. The 1994 elections were so embarrassing for Occhetto that he resigned from his post as a party secretary in July of that year, and to take his place will of course be Massimo D'Alema. D'Alema's mission was easier said than done. He needed to modernize an old party and prepare it to fight against a literal marketing campaign. He knew that the only way to beat Berlusconi was by allying himself with other forces, and the only ones still around were their old rivals of Democrazia Cristiana, who were now divided into smaller parties. On a similar matrix to the historical compromise of 1976, the PDS made an alliance with most Christian democratic parties, the Greens and other smaller entities, to challenge Forza Italia's coalition at the 1996 elections. That's not to say D'Alema first didn't try to get to know his enemy. In fact, the two leaders met quite often and actually grew fond of each other on a personal level, but they were still determined to get each other out of the power game. Initially, not all Christian democratic parties joined D'Alema's alliance. For example, UDR was allied with Berlusconi at first, with people like Clemente Mastella and Pier Ferdinando Casini being among their ranks, but by the late 90s everyone had joined the former communists in the Olive Branch coalition. This worked, and between 1996 and 2001 the parliament had a left-wing majority. The first government to win the vote of confidence was Romano Prodi's, a Christian Democrat chosen by D'Alema as the face of the alliance. Now, at the time, the Olive Branch and their allies did not have enough seats to make a government, and so they relied on the external support of Bertinotti's Communist Refoundation Party, which turned out more of an handicap than anything else. Prodi and Bertinotti would fight all the time whenever an important law had to pass. By 1998, the remaining Christian Democrats, led by former President Francesco Cossiga, who were not allied to the Olive Branch yet, came to the rescue of the latter and joined their alliance, hence making Bertinotti's votes non-essential. It will be on that same year that D'Alema will become prime minister, forming a way stronger government coalition. Since he was the first former communist prime minister, Cossiga thought it would be hilarious to give him a baby made of sugar as a joke, because you know, communists eat babies. He will be prime minister until the year 2000, and he will actually run the country relatively well, despite there being a war next door. D'Alema has said many times that he regrets ever becoming prime minister, because the only thing people remember from those days is Italy's contribution to the Americans in the Yugoslavian war. D'Alema tried his best to avoid the war to happen, even going as far as to intercept President Milosevic in his secret visit to Rome, where he went to the dentist. I'm not joking, his dentist was in Italy, and he went there in secret. When the Serbian president refused to come to a compromise, Italy, alongside his Western allies, bombed the shit out of Serbia in response to the genocide they were attempting tempting. Despite President Clinton and Bush Jr.'s only requesting to use Italian bases, D'Alema insisted on involving his troops and planes into the conflict for the sake of national recognition and to show everyone that Italy had the strength and the means to be a world power. While it is true that Italy gained a lot of respect from the aid provided during the conflict, the Italians were not so supportive, and Berlusconi was slowly gaining ground. By 1999, Forza Italia had won the European elections, resulting into a big blow for D'Alema, who will resign shortly after in favor of Giuliano Amato, who I look forward to talk about too, since his government and history are quite unique. Between 2001 and 2006, Italy witnessed a clear economic boom, which is partly attributed to some financial laws passed by the left in previous years, but also for the country entering the Eurozone. Back then, pro-Euro sentiments were something only left-wing parties were in favor of, so you just imagine how Berlusconi and his allies felt when they won the elections and started doing a wonderful job because of the same currency they were opposed to. Forza Italia was very quick at reconsidering their previous positions. In fact, if Italy was doing so well, it's also thanks to Berlusconi's governance. However, the olive branch never truly recovered from these electoral laws and disbanded in 2004. The left will win again in 2006, and Prodi will become prime minister again with D'Alema as foreign minister. But the parliamentary majority was extremely slim, and the left hardly got anything done, to the disappointment of everyone. As minister, D'Alema did two noteworthy things. First of all, he took a proactive diplomatic stance during the 2006 Lebanon war by managing diplomatic meetings between the two nations as a representative of a neutral nation outside the conflict. And later he pledged to promote a moratorium presented to the UN on the abolition of the death penalty in the world. In addition to all this, perhaps the only good thing we can draw from these 2 years of legislature was the foundation of the Democratic Party, a new entity made up of all the moderate left forces that had characterized Italian politics until then. The title of founder is attributed to Walter Veltroni, a longtime partner of D'Alema and Prodi. The Democratic Party was in essence the fusion between the Democratic Party of the left and the Margherita Party made out of center-left Christian Democrats. This wing turned out the more successful one out of the two. In fact, the more recent secretaries such as Letta and Renzi came from that front and definitely contributed into making the PD a more liberal party rather than a social democratic one. Sure, there were exceptions like Bersani and Zingaretti, but ultimately the more successful leaders do not have a lot in common with what the left used to be. After 2008, D'Alema slowly started to grow distant from his creation until he decided to leave in 2017 to make a new party called Article 1, whose current party secretary is our Minister of Healthcare Roberto Speranza. The party never really took off, and D'Alema has played a relatively marginal role in the recent political games, until very recently when he claimed to be considering to re-merge his party with PD because he likes the current alliance with Giuseppe Conte of the Five Star Movement. They really seem to get along, and it makes sense when you think about it. Letta, however, does not seem too enthusiastic, because D'Alema described the reason why he left as an ideological disease, and understandably he got super offended, like, bro, just because you don't like it, it doesn't mean your colleagues nor your electorate is sick, but okay. During the presidential elections, he also suggested the left to elect his friend Amato, and he succeeded in convincing them it was a great idea. Sadly, Salvini disagreed and Mattarella was re-elected. Well, I guess that is all I have to say on Massimo D'Alema. I have been wanting to make this video for a very long time, and I'm happy I finally got around to it. While I do not share many positions with Massimo D'Alema, for example, is a big supporter of the Chinese Communist Party, which is quite depressing, I definitely think he is a very interesting figure, and I wonder what he will do next. What do you think of D'Alema? Good thoughts, bad thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. I will see you next time.